Howdy my totally as always Tubular Gamers, and we're back with, you guessed it, another ranking video. And today we're going to be doing something a little different. You know, it's getting near the end of the year. We're getting into those conversations of what was the best game you played this year, what are some of the best games you've played this year. And you might even reflect on what some of the best games of the last couple of years were. Well, for almost the last 10 years, we've actually had an award show dedicated to celebrating video games and what the best games of the year were, known as the Game Awards, hosted by Geoff Keighley. And obviously, Geoff Keighley's show has gotten a lot more attention and notoriety in the last couple of years than it did, say, 10 years ago. But what I thought I would talk about today is ranking all of the games that won Game of the Year from this award show. Now, obviously, there are tons of different outlets and publications that do their Game of the Year awards. There's a ton of different award shows for video games, especially nowadays, and I'm not discounting any of them. It's just, it seems like the biggest one, the one that gets the most notoriety, the one with the most advertisements and new trailers and all of that, is the Game Awards with Geoff. So yeah, ranking the last 9 Game of the Year winners and what I believe will win Game of the Year this year from worst to best. I say worst, but trust me, none of these games are anywhere near bad. It's more like best to bester. I don't know, that doesn't make any sense. And, you know, before somebody calls me out on it, I'll just say it immediately. I'm not the most original. I did see this list from Rabid Luigi a while back, so I'm gonna give him a big shout out. He came up with this idea. I thought it was pretty cool, and I was like, my list would look pretty different, so I thought I'd do my own. And anyone else is welcome to do their own list. I'd love to hear it in the comments. Or of course you do your own video like I did. Now when it comes to making this ranking, it was actually pretty difficult. Like, a lot of these games are, no hyperbole, some of the greatest video games ever made. These are easily some of the best games of the last 10 years, and all of them are fantastic in their own right. I'm pretty sure with how beloved these games are, it literally does not matter the list I make. People are going to be unhappy or disagree with me, so yeah, just let me know. And honestly, with these games being as good as they are, really this just kind of comes down to personal preference. And so as always, this is just my opinion. There might be some hot takes, some cold takes. You just let me know down below how you're feeling about this. I'm not giving each of these games a little review. I'm just taking a quick little look at each one of them, seeing how they hold up nowadays, and if I think they should have won Game of the Year that year. This is all, again, just my own opinion. You know, 2023's Game of the Year has not been decided yet, so this will be interesting to look back on. You know, I could totally get it wrong, but I might get it right. Either way, this is my Game of the Year, and it's my list anyway. So like, share, comment, subscribe. Let's just get right into it. Of the 10 Game of the Years from the last 10 years, what do I think is the weakest? I think the weakest game is Overwatch, which won the 2016 Game of the Year awards. And you know, it kind of is the worst one by default because it's actually been shut down. Yeah, the original Overwatch, for the few people who aren't familiar, was actually shut down and replaced with Overwatch 2. So yeah, you actually can't play that game that won the 2016 Game of the Year award. But Overwatch 2 is very, very similar to the first game in many aspects. But all I gotta say is, man, it is kind of sad to look back on Overwatch, because in 2016, Overwatch really was the shit. It was crazy hype. I got it at release. I don't even like play Blizzard games, but I got Overwatch. I loved Overwatch. I played so much of Overwatch in 2016, but then they just kept updating it and making things just not as good, in my opinion. And over the last couple of years, like, I just have steadily watched Overwatch decline. I guess you could say I overwatched it decline. Okay, no, shitty pun aside, it is kind of sad what happened to Overwatch. I would say Overwatch is one of the most mismanaged brands of the last like 10 years, and I really just don't know what happened. Like, Activision Blizzard really just shit the bed here. They were not able to maintain momentum or hype or keep the game constantly updated in ways that people liked. Like, Overwatch is nowhere near as popular as it was many years ago. I'm not saying it's not popular, it totally is, and there's a bunch of people still playing it, but that hype it had in 2016 has never been matched. And I would argue it's one of the most mismanaged series in history. Like, when it comes to video games, like, this series has just been sorely mismanaged. And you know, with Microsoft taking over, maybe things can get turned around and we can get back to 2016 levels, but I got no idea at this point. As for Overwatch 2016, man, I loved that game. It was so much fun. The team aspect was really great. I stayed up really late playing with my friends. I loved how different all of the characters were, just how many different combinations there were, the maps, the lore, what little story there was. I actually really enjoyed almost everything about Overwatch. It was the game I probably played the most of in 2016, that or Pokemon Go. And if you'd asked me what I thought the best game of 2016 was, there's a very good chance I would have said Overwatch. But nowadays, you won't find me playing Overwatch at all. Like, you just really won't. I've just lost all interest in it, and that really is unfortunate. But hey, in 2016, that shit was fire, it was hype, and it was exciting. And so here we have Dragon Age Inquisition, which won the inaugural Game Awards Game of the Year in 2014. You know, there was Game Award shows before 2014. I remember they were on like Spike, but this was the first of what is now considered the Game Awards show with Jeff Keighley hosting and yada yada yada. You know how it goes. Anyway, Dragon Age Inquisition, you know, I remember I was a bit perplexed that this game won Game of the Year. I very much remember feeling like, hey, no, there's games I played in 2014 that were better than Dragon Age Inquisitions. Games like Mario Kart 8, Smash Brothers for Wii U, especially South Park Stick of Truth. That was probably my favorite game from that year. Or shit, even like Sunset Overdrive, because you know I gotta rep Insomniac at some point. But none of those games were even nominated for Game of the Year. The games that were nominated were Bayonetta 2, Dark Souls 2, Hearthstone, Dragon Age, and Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor. And of those 5 games, yeah, I'd say Dragon Age is maybe the best. I don't know. Dark Souls 2 is pretty good for me. I know that might be a hot take, but I really enjoyed that game. But Dragon Age Inquisition was still a very solid game. It was one of BioWare's better games. In my opinion, it's the best of the Dragon Age games. I haven't played a ton of the Dragon Age games, but I did play Inquisition, and I enjoyed it for what it was. You know, I don't think it blew my mind like Mass Effect did, and I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite RPGs, not even Western RPGs of all time, but it was still very solid, and it was a good improvement, especially on Dragon Age 2. You know, it had a pretty good story, it had some nice characters, the romance options were decent, the combat was actually pretty cool. I liked how like they mixed the action and turn-based combat to just kind of get this nice little blend in between. I enjoyed that. The presentation I remember was really great, but I don't know, I just remember walking away from it going, yeah, that was pretty good, but Game of the Year, I don't know about that one, and that's why this game is placed where it is, because of all of these games outside of Overwatch, I really do think it is the weakest. But obviously, if you haven't played it and you like RPGs, then I can very easily recommend it, but I would also recommend all of the other games coming up and Mass Effect more than Dragon Age Inquisition. Again, still a good game. I'm not throwing shade or shitting on it, it's just it wasn't my favorite game from 2014. And here we have It Takes Two, which won Game of the Year in 2021. Now, I was very surprised when this game won Game of the Year, but it was a very feel-good story with Joseph Fares. I mean, he had shown up a few times on the Game Awards show, just either stupid drunk or just saying a bunch of crazy, funny things, but to see him win the award, to see his game win the award, it was pretty great to see. Now, It Takes Two is a fantastic game. I did talk about it a while back, all of Joseph's games actually, but just to reiterate, I really did enjoy It Takes Two. It's my favorite of his games with so many different gameplay styles, all of them just feeling, controlling, and playing so great, how much fun the game was, how it really makes you work together with whoever you're playing with, an excellent presentation, a nice story. Like, It Takes Two really is one of the quintessential cooperative experiences. If you're going to play a co-op game in 2023 or on, It Takes Two should be near the top of your list. It is just fantastic. Now, I was a bit surprised that it won Game of the Year because it was up against some heavy hitters. Games like Deathloop, Metroid Dread, Psychonauts 2, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and RE Village. Those are all heavy hitters. If you asked me which I thought was going to win the Game of the Year for the Game Awards show, I probably would have said Deathloop. That's the easy pick, but no, to see It Takes Two win, that was pretty cool. My personal favorite game of 2021 was probably Psychonauts 2. That game just blew me away, but it's very cool that we had 2 3D platformers, at least primarily 3D platformers, nominated for Game of the Year. I mean, plenty of people think this genre has been long dead since 2000, but I mean, here's 2 of them for Game of the Year. So clearly they're not dead and on the way out unless your name is Mario. But It Takes Two is still a fantastic game. It was a really, again, feel-good moment to see Joseph finally get the recognition that he deserves. His game is great. His team did an excellent job. And I'm really excited for what they come up with next. You will totally catch me day one playing whatever Hazelight Studios makes next, because everything they've made has just gotten better and better. You know, A Way Out's good too. I'm going to give a shout out to A Way Out. That's another really solid one, but It Takes Two should not be missed if you're looking for a cooperative experience. I've said the same thing basically like 4 times over, but what I'm trying to say is the game's kind of good, you know. And here we have the most controversial game easily, which is The Last of Us Part 2, which won Game of the Year in 2020. I was really surprised this game won Game of the Year in 2020. Like, I like The Last of Us Part 2. I know plenty of people have made long-ass videos about why they love it or they hate it. I've always enjoyed the game, but it was not my favorite game from 2020. I think The Last of Us 2 has a lot of great elements, but there are a few things I don't like about it. Particularly, I don't love the story, and not because of the beginning. I don't love the ending. I don't love a few of the characters' motivations. I don't love how long the game is. The pacing, the flow is not amazing in my opinion, but you know, the gunplay, the stealth, the world building, the environments, and the moment-to-moment action I do think is pretty good. But when it comes to 2020, what games came out that year, that was one of the best years ever for gaming. I know a lot of bad shit happened, like a lot of bad shit happened in 2020, but in terms of the video games that came out that year, there was some really heavy hitters, and you can see it in what was nominated. Animal Crossing's New Horizon, Doom Eternal, Final Fantasy VII Remake, Hades, and Ghost of Tsushima. I'll be real, I'd say all those games are better than The Last of Us Part 2. But that is just my opinion. I'm sure I've pissed off plenty of people in the comments just by even mentioning this game, but what I'm trying to say is The Last of Us Part 2, really good game. You know, if you like The Last of Us, you like those over-the-shoulder cinematic experiences and you haven't tried it yet, or maybe you just watched the TV show and you want to try the games now, yeah, I do think it is worth playing, but yeah, I'd much rather play Animal Crossing or Doom Eternal or play through the Final Fantasy VII Remake again. Shit, I even thought Ghost of Tsushima was actually better than The Last of Us Part 2, and that game was really good, actually. Hades is no slouch either. All these games were really big bangers. 2020 was such a banger year for the games that came out that year. Even like the smaller games that came out that year were pretty good also. I just realized, breaking news, I'm actually supposed to talk about The Last of Us Part 2 and not just 2020, but you know, The Last of Us Part 2, it is what it is. Everyone's got their own opinion of this game. I'm not giving this game a full review in this video, but if you really want to see me talk about it, let me know down below. Maybe I will one day. I worked a little bit with Naughty Dog when I was with PlayStation, but not a ton, and yeah, I've talked enough about this game. Last of Us Part 2, you know it, I know it. It exists. It won Game of the Year that year somehow. Let's just move on. Alright, at this point, we're low-key just at GOTY territory. It doesn't really matter what I put. You're probably going to disagree with me on something, but here we have Sekiro, which won Game of the Year in 2019. I remember being pretty surprised that Sekiro won Game of the Year. I mean, I really do enjoy Sekiro. I just recently reviewed it and talked about it, but compared to some of the other games on here, I don't know if I'd say it's the best. It was up against Control, Death Stranding, Outer Worlds, RE2, and then Smash Bros. Ultimate. I mean, RE2 and Smash Bros. Ultimate are some of my favorite games of all time, but Sekiro won Game of the Year, and Sekiro is a fantastic game. I'm not denying that at all. In fact, my review, I was incredibly praising of it. I think it has some of the best boss fights that From Software's ever made. It has excellent level design. It's really punishing, but man, this really is one of the most satisfying games of all time. I absolutely do love it. Like, I played a ton of this game. I've played through it more than once because I have enjoyed my time with it that much. But I don't know, RE2, it really is like one of my favorite horror games, favorite games of all time. And then Smash Bros. Ultimate, I mean, I would just say that's maybe my favorite fighting game of all time. Like, just what an excellent game. But yeah, Sekiro, it's a really good one. I mean, if you haven't played it at this point, but you like, say, Dark Souls or Elden Ring, then I really don't know what you're waiting for. Like, the game doesn't ever really get all that cheap, so just go check it out. There's very few games ever made like Sekiro. I'd say the closest is probably Wolong, and Wolong is low-key nothing like Sekiro at the same time. That totally didn't make any sense what I just said. But you know what? What I'm trying to say is Sekiro is an excellent hack and slash. It's challenging, it's punishing, it's rewarding, it's engaging, it's exciting, it's got a really cool narrative to it. It again has some of the best boss fights ever, maybe the hardest final boss of like any game I've ever played. It has amazing visuals, superb level design, enemy design, encounters, and it's so satisfying. There are a few games you can play that are as satisfying as Sekiro. Like when you just counter the shit out of somebody and then just stab them over and over, like that sounds pretty wrong, but like it is so much fun in this game. Like this game is an absolute blast. But fuck, is it hard. If there was ever a game that symbolized get good or go away, it is this game. This game is not messing around, but it's so good. And here we have God of War, which won Game of the Year in 2018. Now this one, I wasn't really all that surprised by. I mean, God of War 2018 is pretty beloved. They really took Kratos out of the old God of War and put him in this new cinematic over-the-shoulder experience that Sony's really known for, that started with like Uncharted and The Last of Us, but I feel like God of War still was one of those games that really pushed what Sony was going to be making in the future. I mean, ever since then, almost all of Sony's games have followed God of War's template to some extent. And even then, God of War was following what The Last of Us put down, which kind of was following what Uncharted did. Anyway, that's not what's important. What's important is that God of War 2018, yeah, it is a really great game, and the best thing about God of War 2018, and not even close, is the narrative. The narrative, the story, the characters, Kratos and Atreus' bond, it's really great, and I have nothing but a ton of praise for it. It's some of the best father-son bonding you'll find in any video game. The story has a lot of great moments, a lot of twists and turns, and it's really engaging, and you really do want to see what's going to happen next. And the ending is pretty cool. The presentation was fantastic. Also, it looked amazing. It felt amazing. You really were in this other world. It was really cool. When it comes to the gameplay, you know, I've never talked about these games on my channel. This might be a hot take, but I've always thought the gameplay is just okay, honestly, in God of War. I've always thought the gameplay of God of War 3 is better, but the gameplay's pretty solid here, and it was a bit different from the older games. It's a really good game. The games it was up against, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I don't know how the fuck that thing got nominated for anything. They must have been buying the XP packs to make it not this grind fest. Anyway, there was Celeste, really great indie game. Marvel Spider-Man by Insomniac, yeah, that was pretty good. There was Monster Hunter World, which was easily the best multiplayer game of that year. And then there was Red Dead Redemption 2. Red Dead Redemption 2, I don't know, I'd probably say I like it more than God of War 2018, but not by much. It's a pretty even battle for the most part. And they also kind of fall into the same pitfalls. I mean, both of these games are extremely unreplayable. Like, I can't imagine how boring it would be to play through this game again. But for a first-time experience, it's nothing of low-key magical. Like, it's a great game. God of War 2018 is a great game. We even got Ragnarok now, which in my opinion is quite a bit better. And I was even involved in that game's development, but I much prefer Ragnarok. But you know, to get Ragnarok, we had to get this game, and this game's pretty good. Ooh, here we have another hot take. Here we have Zelda Breath of the Wild, which won Game of the Year in 2017. Now, Breath of the Wild, a lot of people have very long-ass videos explaining everything about this game, and you know, it's really easy to see why it won Game of the Year. It really re-energized not only Zelda as a franchise, but Nintendo and even low-key game design. So many games, especially nowadays, take a lot of inspiration from what Breath of the Wild did, just dropping you into this big-ass open world where you can go do literally whatever you want. The level of freedom you would get in this game is unprecedented compared to games that came out back then. In fact, another game coming up really owes a lot to Breath of the Wild in that level of freedom that you would get, and Breath of the Wild is really a great game. It was one of my favorite games of the year. I don't think it was my personal favorite game of 2017, but of the games it was up against, I can totally see why it won. It was up against Horizon Zero Dawn, it was up against Persona 5, PUBG, and Mario Odyssey. Now, let's just get the obvious one out of there. PUBG being there is just hilarious to look back on. The game wasn't even out. It was still in early access, but like so many people were playing it that they like almost had to include it. If you ask me what multiplayer game, what game I played the most of in 2017, it totally was PUBG. I loved PUBG, but looking back, yeah, it really wasn't that great. It certainly had a lot of issues, but it was up against Persona 5 and Mario Odyssey, which are some of my favorite games of all time. I would personally have those a little higher than Breath of the Wild. I've always liked Mario a little more, and then Persona 5. Oh, I just love Persona 5. That game is just so good. But Breath of the Wild was nothing to scoff at. 2017 was also a banger year for video games. There was a lot of good shit, especially from Nintendo. This is like the best year Nintendo ever had in gaming. That or 2023, seriously. Nintendo had some really good years. And Breath of the Wild, to a lot of people, really was the cherry on top. It was the perfect game, or as close to perfect as it gets, with just so much content, so much to see. This giant open world that just, it took Nintendo a long ass time to design it, and it makes sense why it's so big. There's so much to it. And you know, the game has a few issues in my opinion. The story isn't exactly the most exciting, and at times the pacing and just emptiness of the world can get to you, but all in all, like Breath of the Wild, nobody's gonna deny that it's not a fantastic game and one of the very best Zelda games ever made. I also found it incredibly replayable, and finding different ways to go about objectives or puzzles is really great stuff. Breath of the Wild is a great game. 2017 was a banger year, but there is a reason Breath of the Wild won Game of the Year that year. It really is great. And so here's The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, which won Game of the Year in 2015. Now, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt is one of my very, and I really do mean very, favorite games of all time. I love this game. From the moment I played it, I was so hooked with it, and so when it was up against these other games, which are also really great games, I just knew The Witcher 3 was going to win like immediately, and it did. It was up against Bloodborne, Fallout 4, Metal Gear Solid 5, and Super Mario Maker. Now, don't get me wrong, Super Mario Maker's cool, MGS5's great, Fallout 4's pretty good, and Bloodborne is also really great, but Witcher 3, holy shit, man, this game hits so different. Like, I thought Witcher 1 was, actually I didn't think it was very good. I thought Witcher 2 was okay, but Witcher 3, Holy shit, man, this game was just so good. At every level, it had a really great story, really solid writing. Geralt is one of the best characters in any video game. And then the gameplay, the world design, the quests, it was nothing short of phenomenal. Like, I don't love side quests in games. I've made that pretty clear. Some people even said I'm allergic to side quests, but the side quests in Witcher 3, all the quests actually in Witcher 3 are just so well designed. They're also interesting and different, and the hunts are really great. I really enjoyed the hunting. I really enjoyed everything that goes into it. The combat, which I know some people don't really care for, I thought was also very enjoyable. It had some satisfying moments, and it really would reward you from doing, the basic amount of research on these creatures and, being a witcher, being a hunter. It's actually pretty cool. I was just so sucked into this game, especially the first time I played. I was like, damn, dude, this game just is awesome. And I think I put easy 70, 80 hours into it, and I love just how long it is and how different all the environments are from each other, and how the game really does mix things up to stay interesting 30, 40, 50 hours in. Like when you go to Novigrad is very different from when you're in Skellige where you're on the boat. Like, this is really memorable, interesting areas with a lot of great quests. Again, I'm just repeating myself here. Everybody sucked The Witcher 3's dick when it came out. Everybody's still doing it, myself included. Like, it's just such a good game. I know people who got this game and only played this game for months. Like, this was all they played because it's just that good. And then nowadays, there's the expansions. They've re-released it on modern consoles, and it's aged stupidly well. Like, here we are like 7-8 years later, and the game is still just as phenomenal as it was then. Like, it's crazy how good the game still is. Like, I have zero problem saying that this is one of the greatest games ever made. It's probably in my top 20 favorite games of all time. And at this point, it really doesn't matter who you are or what video games you like, you're missing out on Witcher 3 if you have not tried it yet. 2015 was an awesome year in gaming, but Witcher 3, ooh, so good. And here we have Elden Ring, which won Game of the Year in 2022. Now, Elden Ring really feels like it took a lot of stuff from Breath of the Wild and some stuff from Dark Souls, and then just a bunch of other new ideas and threw them all together to create just an unforgettable experience. Like, my first Elden Ring playthrough is going to be one of those playthroughs I look back on with a great amount of joy. Like, to sound as corny as possible, or maybe as reductive as possible, like, it was just low-key magical. Like, that first playthrough was nothing short of phenomenal. Elden Ring is just one of the greatest games ever made. In my opinion, it's the best of all of From Software's games. I recently reviewed it, and here we are a year later, and I'm still like, dude, Elden Ring was still so unbelievably good. This game just had so much going for it. It had great combat, an excellent open world, superb level design, some really cool dungeons, boss fights that were just incredible. The sheer amount of boss fights was also incredible. The game was challenging, it was engaging, it was fun, it kept things interesting. It always kept things interesting, like whether it was hour 2 or hour 200, okay, maybe not 200, hour like 85 or 90, it always kept things interesting. There was the multiplayer aspect to it. It really just evolved the Dark Souls formula in such a way that it was just crazy. It was so awesome. Like, I truly love Elden Ring. I played this game for months. It's one of the best RPGs ever made, and the best of any Souls-like, whatever you want to call it, anything from that subgenre of RPGs, it's the best one of them all. But you got to remember, 2022, there was a lot of great games last year also. I remember everyone going, it's either going to be God of War Ragnarok or Elden Ring. And I did help during God of War Ragnarok's development, but even I could see that Elden Ring was going to win. But there was so many other good games that came out last year. It was up against Plague Tale Requiem, which was pretty good. Horizon Forbidden West, which is also very good, a bit forgettable, but also very good. There was Stray, one of the best indie games last year. And then Xenoblade Chronicles 3, which I've only played a few hours of, but I enjoy it. And then, it wasn't nominated, but I'm going to give a shout out to Pokemon Legends Arceus. I really did enjoy that game, but yeah, it seemed low-key like a foregone conclusion that Elden Ring was going to win pretty much the entire year because of just how big it was, how amazing it was, and it's great to see just how successful Elden Ring was too. This isn't some small little niche RPG series like Dark Souls was when it started. No. Elden Ring sold like crazy. It's super popular now, and I will be there day one for whatever From Software makes it next. But the real question will be, is it as good as Elden Ring? Because Elden Ring really just is that good. It is one of the best open worlds you'll ever find in a video game, and the design of it truly is spectacular. It's one of my favorite games of all time. And so here we have 2023's Game of the Year. Now, at this time, we don't know which game is winning Game of the Year. We know the games that are nominated, but we don't actually know what the winner is. Now, call it recency bias. In fact, I'll even call it recency bias. It probably is just recency bias, but 2023 is like the best year in gaming ever. There has been so many phenomenal video games. Like, I've never seen so many amazing games come out in the span of 11 to 12 months. Now, the nominated games are Alan Wake 2, Baldur's Gate 3, Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, Marvel's Spider-Man 2, the Resident Evil 4 remake, and Super Mario Bros. Wonder. Now, of all of those games, which do I think is the best? I actually think Baldur's Gate 3 is the best of these games. I know it might seem silly, I was part of Marvel's Spider-Man 2's development for so long, but yeah, out of all these games, my personal opinion is Baldur's Gate 3 is the best. Baldur's Gate 3 is one of the greatest video games ever made. It very well might be in my top 10 favorite games of all time. I've never played an RPG that just had as much depth, character, or customization to it. The story is nothing short of phenomenal. It's intriguing, it's interesting, it's got a ton of amazing twists and turns. It has excellent characters, the best party members of almost any RPG. The battle mechanics are really great. Sure, it is very D&D and turn-based, which I get might not be for everyone, but shit, man, this game is so good. If you can't get over the hurdle of it being turn-based or D&D related, well, that's really unfortunate. You're really missing out on one of the greatest video games ever made. I know I've said that plenty of times in this video. I probably ruined that term, but all of those games are really good too. This one, it really is one of the greatest. Like, it just doesn't get much better than Baldur's Gate 3. Is there some issues? Yeah, at times it's janky. I've had some bugs, and it might not have the widest appeal since, oh, it's turn-based or it's based off D&D and there's dice rolls, but like, this game just has so much going for it. I've never seen a game with so much depth, with so much replayability, with so many different ways to go about scenarios where your character's backstory matters so much, who you have with you matters so much, how many different paths you can take, not only in combat, but when you're talking to people or when you're figuring out scenarios, and how the game just doesn't totally shit the bed at the end and it actually is a pretty solid ending and it doesn't totally flub things up like, say, Mass Effect. Like, I just love Baldur's Gate 3. Alan Wake 2 is phenomenal. It's a great game with an amazing story. It's one of the craziest games ever made. Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, it really improves on Breath of the Wild. Like, it is crazy how much it improves on Breath of the Wild. It's significantly better in my opinion, and Breath of the Wild won Game of the Year that year, so that's just crazy. Marvel's Spider-Man 2, I've talked about that game enough. The Resident Evil 4 remake, they remade one of my favorite games of all time. Of course I'm gonna love this, but it is a remake, so I don't know, it kind of feels cheap to say that's the best game of the year. And then Super Mario Bros. Wonder, maybe the greatest Mario platformer of them all, with some creative, amazing level design. Like, all of these games are really good, and they all have very real chances of winning Game of the Year. I could totally be wrong and Baldur's doesn't win. I think Baldur's is going to win. It's my favorite game of the year. But you also have to remember, that's just what's nominated. There were so many other amazing games that came out this year. Games like Hi-Fi Rush, games like Lies of P, Final Fantasy 16, Jedi Survivor, Armored Core, Street Fighter 6. Like, there were so many amazing video games this year. Like, if you're a gamer, you're eating really good this year. It is pretty awful how many layoffs have affected people, yours truly as well, but there's been a lot of amazing games this year, and I really think Baldur's Gate 3 is at the very top. But regardless of which game you think it wins Game of the Year, or what you think the best game of the year was, we can all agree that it was a fantastic year for games. And that's where I'm calling this video. It's a lot longer than I anticipated. We went about 30 minutes, but if you enjoyed the video, please let me know down below. I'd really much appreciate it. And if you made it to this part of the video, comment cement as in what's in the ground. That'll be our code word that you made it to the end. Thank you very much. Hope you all have a wonderful day. See ya.